Have you ever looked at your day and wondered where it all went, not in chaos, but in quiet drift? No explosion, no crisis, just a slow fade into distraction, hesitation, and things left undone. It's not that you're lazy, it's that your mind has no law to answer to. In the absence of order, the soul forgets its strength. The Stoics understood this long before science caught up. They didn't rely on willpower or wait for motivation. They lived with discipline not as a punishment, but as a form of freedom. A sacred structure that held them steady when life pulled at their edges. This video is not about hacks or checklists. It's about anchoring yourself when the world tries to scatter you, about reclaiming your mind, your minutes, and your meaning through 12 timeless laws. Not rules to obey, but principles to embody. If you've ever felt pulled in every direction but your own, stay with me. The path back to yourself begins with what you choose to honor. And true discipline begins in silence, long before the results ever appear. 1. Discipline is self-respect made visible. How do you treat yourself when no one's watching, not when someone's counting on you, not when you're being praised or pressured? I mean those quiet hours, when it's just you, your thoughts, your choices. That's where discipline is revealed. Not in public routines, but in private moments where you either step forward into who you could be or slip back into who you've always been. Discipline at its core isn't about punishment. It's not cold, it's not harsh, and it's not about denying joy. That's the mistake people make. They treat it like a cage. But real discipline isn't a cage. It's a code. It's the quiet decision to choose what strengthens you over what soothes you. Not because you're at war with yourself, but because you've stopped betraying the version of you that you know you're capable of becoming. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And that's the truth most avoid. Because if you don't lead your own mind, someone else will. A craving, a mood, a distraction. The loudest voice wins when you don't anchor yourself. And slowly, day by day, you start drifting. Not because you're weak, but because you're unanchored. Most people think discipline means shame, force, guilt. But the Stoics saw it differently. Discipline is self-alignment. It's what happens when you care about your future enough to stop letting your moods decide for you. It's a return, a homecoming. That moment when you look at your life and quietly say, "Enough, I'm not going to keep abandoning myself." Take something simple. Your alarm goes off at 6 in the morning. You're tired. Your body says stay in bed. But the night before, you made a promise, not to your coach, not to a friend, to yourself. So you sit up, you breathe, you begin. That small act, done without anyone watching, isn't just a habit. It's a declaration, a reminder that your goals matter more than your excuses. That's discipline, and it's beautiful. Or maybe you've decided to take your health seriously. You're at dinner. Everyone's laughing, indulging, offering you one more bite, one more drink. And you pause. You feel the urge to fit in, to ease the moment. But instead, you remember your deeper why, and you choose to stay on course. That moment isn't about restriction. It's about authorship. You didn't just say no to a plate. You said yes to your power. Discipline teaches people how to treat you. When you respect your own time, others notice. When you show consistency, others feel your boundaries. When you keep your word to yourself, your presence shifts. You walk with more certainty, not because you're louder, but because you're rooted. You're no longer performing, you're aligned. And alignment isn't perfection, it's honesty. It's the willingness to look at your life and see where you've been lying to yourself. How many times have you told yourself you'd start tomorrow, that this one time doesn't matter, that it's just a small delay? Discipline doesn't let you hide behind those illusions. It demands truth. And that truth, while uncomfortable, is what sets you free. This is why people avoid discipline. Not because they're lazy, but because facing your potential requires discomfort. It's easier to live in the idea of who you could be than to do the real work of becoming it. But that's where Stoicism steps in, not as a rule book, but as a compass. It doesn't ask how you feel, it asks what's right. And then it calls you to act on that answer, repeatedly, not for applause, not for aesthetics, but for integrity. So if you're struggling with discipline, don't start by seeking a new tactic. Start with truth. Ask yourself, where have I been choosing comfort over commitment? Where have I been giving away my future for a moment of ease? And, more importantly, what would change if I started showing up for myself like I show up for the people I care about? Discipline is not a trend. It's not something you post about. It's a way of saying, I matter. My mission matters, and I refuse to live like my time means nothing. You don't have to get everything right. You just have to keep one promise. Make one decision with intention. Reclaim one morning. That's enough to begin, because the real flex isn't the early wake-up. It's the quiet strength of knowing you did what you said you would, that you built a self you can trust. And in a noisy world, that kind of self-trust isn't just rare. It's unshakable. And it's yours to build, starting now. 2. Build discipline that matches your nature. Discipline is not a costume you borrow. It's not something you copy from a YouTuber, a CEO, or a Stoic quote on your feed. Real discipline begins with one honest question. Does this structure actually fit the shape of my life? Because if it doesn't, no matter how noble it looks on paper, it will eventually become a cage. Some people thrive on early alarms, cold showers, back-to-back calendars. For them, discipline looks like hard lines and strict repetition. Others try that same blueprint and feel suffocated, not because they're weak, but because it doesn't match their rhythm. It's like forcing a poet into a soldier's uniform. The form might hold, but the soul will slowly disappear. The Stoics didn't teach uniformity. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire. Epictetus taught in poverty. Seneca navigated political power and spiritual solitude. Their lives looked nothing alike, but their principle was the same. Know your nature and live by it. Self-mastery to the Stoic wasn't about copying someone else's structure. It was about creating one from within. Let's make this real. Imagine two people. One is a soldier, the other a writer. The soldier might find energy in rigid schedules, physical routines, and precision. His form of discipline is built on external order. The writer, on the other hand, may come alive at night, working best in silence, needing creative chaos to find clarity. But they both need discipline, just not the same kind. This is where many people fall short. They don't ask what kind of structure their nature actually responds to. They just adopt the version that seems most popular, and when it doesn't work, they blame their willpower. But maybe it's not about effort. Maybe it's about mismatch. Maybe the structure you're trying to live inside doesn't speak your language. If you've ever tried to wake up at 5 in the morning because some book said it's what successful people do, you know this pain. You try, you fail, you feel ashamed, you think you're lazy. But what if your mind lights up at 10 at night? What if your deepest focus comes in the dark when the world is quiet? Then forcing a morning ritual is not discipline. It's self-sabotage dressed up as virtue. The Stoics believed in living according to nature. That doesn't just mean the seasons or the stars. It means your inner ecosystem, your wiring, your temperament. Real discipline doesn't crush that. It collaborates with it. It's not about squeezing yourself into someone else's rhythm. It's about carving out your own and honoring it with consistency. When you find that rhythm, when the system matches your truth, everything changes. You stop needing motivation to move. You stop forcing yourself to show up. You start flowing with intention. Discipline stops being a struggle and starts becoming alignment. Like the current of a river pulling you forward because you're finally swimming in the right direction. This doesn't mean you let yourself off the hook. Stoic discipline still requires resistance, structure, and sacrifice. But those sacrifices become meaningful when they're made in service of a path that's actually yours. And the structure becomes sustainable because it's built around who you really are, not who you think you're supposed to be. So ask yourself this: have I been borrowing systems that look good but don't feel true? Have I been mistaking someone else's code for my own compass? And more importantly, what would it look like to craft a discipline that reflects my deepest nature? One that pushes me but also respects me. One that's honest about my strengths and equally aware of my blind spots. That's the goal. Not perfection, not performance, but a personal law. A structure that holds you up, not one that wears you down. Because the truth is, you can't build a solid life using someone else's blueprint. You have to become the architect of your own discipline. And once you do, once your structure begins to match your soul, something powerful emerges. Momentum. Let's carry that momentum forward. Because the next truth about discipline goes even deeper. It's not just about systems and schedules. It's about what you're willing to say no to. 3. Without order, you pay in silence. Disorder doesn't arrive with a bang. It creeps in quietly. It whispers through little things, the unanswered texts, the dishes you say you'll do later, the workout you push off until tomorrow. It's in the noise in your mind you can't quite name, the mental clutter, the lack of rhythm, and over time, that silence becomes heavy, not overnight, but slowly. You start to feel off. You can't quite explain it, but you know something is slipping. The Stoics saw this clearly. Disorder isn't just a physical mess, it's a spiritual one. When your outer world is disorganized, your inner world feels unsettled. When your time has no anchor, your energy has no direction. And when your days lack rhythm, your soul forgets what peace feels like. That's the hidden cost of disorder, not just lost productivity, but lost clarity, lost presence, a lost connection to the person you were trying to become. You might think you're just being flexible. You'll figure it out as you go. But the truth is, if you don't give your time a structure, the world will. And the world doesn't care about your goals. Distractions don't ask for permission. Notifications don't wait for the right moment. Chaos doesn't knock. It walks in uninvited the second you leave the door cracked open. What makes this dangerous is that you rarely feel the damage right away. Disorder is slow. It doesn't hit like a storm. It seeps like water. One day you stop journaling. You start checking your phone before you've even stretched. You stop planning your days. You eat what's easiest. Say yes to what's convenient. Postpone what matters, and nothing breaks immediately, but you start fading. Quietly. Invisibly. Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And most of that waste isn't loud, it's quiet. It doesn't come from laziness, it comes from lack of clarity. When you have no structure, you live in reaction. You let your day pull you wherever it wants. You become a passenger in your own life, driven not by vision, but by mood, impulse, and other people's noise. That's not freedom. That's invisible slavery." Now let's be clear, order isn't about being rigid. It's not about filling every second with tasks or micromanaging your existence until there's no room left to breathe. It's about creating boundaries that protect what matters, mental and emotional containers that give shape to your effort. A morning routine can be a container. So can journaling, goal tracking, or setting a curfew for your phone. These aren't about control. They're about rescue. They're about saving your attention from the 1,000 things trying to steal it. That's the Stoic way. Not to control the world, but to shape how we move through it. To build an inner framework that supports growth, not sabotages it. Think of it like architecture for the soul, a design that turns chaos into clarity, not by eliminating the chaos, but by building something stronger inside it. So take a moment, be honest. What small disordered thing have you been tolerating? What unfinished task? What silent distraction? What little habit is quietly draining your energy? Maybe it's the clutter in your room. Maybe it's the message you keep meaning to send. Maybe it's the goal you keep delaying because chasing it means facing your fear. Whatever it is, name it. Then do something about it. Not perfectly, just clearly. Because the longer you let disorder linger, the more it robs you, not in big dramatic ways, but in subtle ones. In stolen mornings, in scattered focus, in the erosion of self-trust. You won't collapse in one moment, but you will fade over time. And that kind of loss is harder to notice until it's too deep to ignore. Order is the antidote, not for control's sake, but for freedom's. When you create order in your space, your thoughts, your schedule, you stop surviving your days and start shaping them. You take back the ability to choose, to act, to live with direction. And that's what Stoicism really teaches. Not how to dominate life, but how to design it. With intention, with structure, with peace. Now that we've seen how disorder weakens you in silence, it's time to understand what your environment is truly doing to your discipline. 4. Success can make you soft. Stay sharp. Success is a strange test. It doesn't shout like failure. It whispers. It tells you you've done enough, that it's okay to let go of the edge that kept you sharp. that the hunger you once had can rest now, and that's when it begins. Not the fall, but the soft erosion, the loss of urgency, the quiet surrender to comfort that feels earned, but slowly steals your edge. The Stoics saw this clearly. They never glorified external success. To them, it was never the destination. It was just a stage, a new context in which your discipline would be tested even more. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man of his time, wrote to himself about humility, restraint, and keeping his fire alive. Not because he was weak, but because he knew how easy it is to grow dull when everything seems to be going your way. Think about your own life. You work hard, you push, you say no to distraction, you stay consistent, and then finally something clicks. You get the promotion, the praise, the progress, and subtly your behavior starts to shift. You sleep in just a little, skip one workout. You tell yourself you've earned a break, not rest, but a break from the very habits that brought you here. That's the trap. What got you to the mountaintop won't keep you there. If you stop sharpening your edge the moment you feel comfortable, decline begins quietly. Not in crisis, but in compromise. Not in collapse, but in the loss of clarity. The Stoics warned against this very thing, believing that success signals completion, when in truth, it demands even deeper discipline. Rest is not the enemy. Strategic rest is essential. But there's a difference between resting to recover and surrendering to ease. One strengthens you, the other seduces you into softness. The Stoics feared not rest, but drift, those moments where you slowly become a spectator of your own life, living off past effort instead of current intention. You see it in every area. The relationship you stop nurturing because you think love will maintain itself. The body you neglect because you tell yourself you've earned the junk food. The growth you stop chasing because you believe you've already learned enough. It's not failure, it's stagnation. And it feels safe, which is exactly why it's dangerous. To stay sharp, you need a shift in perspective. You stop thinking of success as a finish line. You see it as a checkpoint, a moment to ask, what still needs refining? Where have I started coasting? What part of me have I stopped challenging? That's what keeps your blade sharp. Not fear, but responsibility. Not guilt, but gratitude expressed through continued effort. Discipline after success requires a new fuel. Early on, maybe you were driven by hunger, by pressure, by a desire to prove something, but once you've achieved something, that fuel runs out. And now you need a new source: devotion, integrity, the love of the process itself. You show up not because you're desperate, but because you're committed, because staying ready is part of who you are now. True excellence isn't a sprint, it's a relationship with your own standards. You don't lower them just because you've hit a milestone. You elevate them because now you have the space and strength to go further. The Stoic way isn't about chasing perfection. It's about sustaining intention, about remembering that success is not an excuse to coast, it's a reason to refine. So if you're in a good place right now, strong, stable, respected, good. But don't let that become your ceiling. Use that ground as a foundation, not a finish line. Keep showing up. Keep asking more of yourself. And if you've drifted, if you've grown a little soft, don't shame yourself. Just return, recommit, restart the fire. Because the truth is simple, discipline built this life, and only discipline will keep it. Now let's move to the next truth. What you do daily when no one's watching reveals whether your fire is still burning. 5. Don't wait for motivation. Move without it. How many mornings have slipped through your fingers because you were waiting to feel right, waiting for motivation to show up, for the fog to lift, for energy to arrive like some divine signal that now, finally, this is the moment to begin. But it doesn't come. Not when you want it. Not when you think you need it. That's because motivation isn't the starting point. It's the side effect. The Stoics understood this centuries ago, and now neuroscience agrees. Action creates momentum, not the other way around. The mind loves comfort. It loves to negotiate. It whispers things like, "You're tired," or "One more hour won't hurt," or "You're just not in the right headspace today." And if you wait for that voice to quiet, you'll be waiting a long time. Because that voice never stops. It just changes form. Discipline doesn't ask how you feel. It asks what you value. It's not born from emotion. It's born from principle. Epictetus didn't say act when it's easy. He said, first decide what kind of person you want to be, and then act like it. Not when you feel like it, but because that's who you are becoming. Imagine a sculptor. He doesn't show up wondering if today's the day he feels like chiseling. He shows up because the craft matters more than the mood. He picks up the tools. He begins. And somewhere between motion and resistance, something shifts. Focus enters. Clarity returns. Not because he waited, but because he moved. We live in a culture addicted to the idea of readiness. Wait for the right time, the right energy, the perfect plan. But life doesn't wait. Time doesn't pause, and your potential doesn't care about your feelings. If you want to build something real, a resilient mind, a stronger body, a life you're proud of, you cannot keep asking for permission from your emotions. You must move, especially when you don't want to, because that's when it counts most. That's when you build the inner signal that says, I lead, my moods follow. So let's bring it down to earth. You don't want to train today? Fine. Don't commit to an hour. Just put on your shoes and step outside. 5 minutes. That's it. You don't want to write? Open your document. 1 sentence. That's all. You're avoiding a hard conversation? Set a 10-minute timer and begin. You're not chasing perfection. You're initiating motion, because once the body moves, the mind catches up. And what felt impossible starts to feel inevitable. The Stoics taught that the hardest moment is always the first. The breath before the action. The second before you say yes. But inside that small window is everything. Your power, your proof, your potential. It's not about doing something grand. It's about doing something consistent, something honest, something that tells the world and yourself you will not be ruled by passing moods. So ask yourself right now, what have I been postponing because I don't feel ready? And more importantly, who would I become if I stopped waiting for that feeling altogether? Imagine a life where action isn't tied to emotion, where you show up, not because you're in the mood, but because it's what the mission requires. That's Stoic strength. That's inner authority. And if this reminder is hitting something real in you, subscribe to stay anchored on this path. Just type "ready" in the comments if you know it's time to stop waiting. Because once you learn to move without motivation, you become dangerous to everything that once held you back. And that's when discipline transforms, not into something you force, but something you embody. Now let's take this deeper, because the next law reveals what kind of people fuel your discipline and which ones quietly destroy it. 6. Live by conscious choice, not auto-reaction. How much of what you do each day is truly chosen, and how much is just inherited noise playing on loop? That question might seem simple, but if you sit with it long enough, it shakes the foundation of how you move through life. Because most people aren't living, they're reacting. Reacting to old expectations, old habits, scripts they never wrote, roles they never agreed to. We wake up, grab our phones, fall into patterns, chase goals. Not because we sat down and chose them, but because they've become automatic, familiar, safe. The Stoics warned us about this kind of drift, and centuries later, Carl Jung echoed the same idea. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That's the danger. When your reactions go unchecked, they begin to define you, and over time you start mistaking the pattern for your personality. You think, this is just who I am. But often, it's not. It's who you became by default, not design. True discipline isn't just about working hard, it's about waking up. It's about becoming deeply aware of what drives you, and then choosing moment by moment how you want to respond. It's not about gritting your teeth and forcing your way through every task. It's about asking better questions. Why am I doing this? Is this my voice or someone else's? Did I choose this path, or did I inherit it without realizing? Let's be honest. A lot of what we call discipline is just conditioning. Maybe you learned that success is the only way to feel worthy, so now you grind yourself into exhaustion and call it ambition. Maybe you learned that keeping the peace meant avoiding conflict, so now you silence your truth and call it maturity. Or maybe you learned to settle for less because someone once told you your desires were too much. These aren't conscious choices. They're survival mechanisms, and they don't just take up space. They shape your future. The Stoic path begins with clarity, a willingness to stop, to reflect, and to question what's been running in the background of your mind. You begin to pause before the automatic yes. You notice the impulse before it becomes action. And in that pause, you ask, is this me, or is this habit? Is this alignment, or just repetition? Living by conscious choice doesn't mean throwing away your past. It means sifting through it with discernment, keeping what strengthens you, releasing what confines you, and redesigning what needs evolution. That's where discipline becomes an act of inner architecture, not just doing hard things, but doing the right hard things. The ones that align with your values, your nature, your direction. In daily life, this shift can look simple. It might mean replacing your morning scroll with 5 minutes of stillness. It might mean catching yourself mid-frustration and responding with curiosity instead of anger. It might mean letting go of a story you've carried for years, the one that says you're not ready, not smart enough, not the kind of person who gets to choose differently. These may seem like small moves, but they change everything because they're no longer automatic. They're deliberate. And that difference between impulse and intention is what makes a life feel lived rather than endured. The Stoics didn't believe in controlling everything around you. They believed in controlling your relationship to what happens. That control begins with choice. So pause today, just for a moment. Ask yourself, where in my life am I still running on default? What routines or responses feel more inherited than chosen? And more importantly, what would it look like to act, not from habit or fear, but from presence? Because the true strength of discipline isn't just in the doing, it's in the deciding. It's not about forcing yourself through life. It's about shaping it. One conscious choice at a time. And once you begin choosing with awareness, the next step is to protect that awareness by becoming mindful of your environment, because who you surround yourself with will either reinforce your clarity or slowly dissolve it. 7. What you do in private defines you in public. Character isn't built under lights, it's built in silence, in the unglamorous hours when no one is watching, no one is praising, and no one is keeping score. That's where the real foundation is laid. In the decision to get up when you're tired, in the promise you keep when there's no pressure, in the small, unseen habits you uphold when no reward is coming. The Stoics understood this deeply. Who you are in private becomes who you are in public, not the other way around. But we live in a world that reverses this, a culture where performance is everything, where social media rewards visibility, not depth, where we are praised for moments, not patterns, for the curated image, not the quiet effort behind it. But public respect without private integrity is a house built on sand. It looks good for a while, until it doesn't, because eventually the mask slips. And what remains is not what you presented, but what you practiced. Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome, yet every night he returned to his journal, not for the empire, not for legacy, but for himself. He knew that his true opponent wasn't out there, it was in here, his ego, his impulses, his comfort. And that battle, the internal one, is fought every day in the shadows. Let's bring that down to daily life. Anyone can give a powerful talk, but do they listen with grace when interrupted at home? Anyone can post a quote about patience, but do they hold their tongue when anger rises? Anyone can appear disciplined when the coach is watching, but what about when the room is empty? No eyes, no deadlines, just you. That's where legacy is written, not in one impressive act, but in your consistent relationship with the unseen. It's the morning you rise without applause, the moment you step away from the easy escape, the night you sit with discomfort instead of burying it. These moments may feel invisible, but they shape you. They deepen your roots. And the deeper the roots, the stronger the life that grows above them. And there's something else. Something psychological. When your private choices match your values, you gain something priceless. Self-trust. Not confidence for show, but real, grounded trust. The kind that doesn't need validation because you've already witnessed your own integrity. When you know you'll follow through even in silence, your presence changes. You walk differently. You speak with quiet conviction. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you've already impressed something important onto your soul. But the opposite is also true. When you lie to yourself, when you cut corners no one will see, it doesn't stay hidden. It follows you. It speaks in your hesitation, your over-explaining, your doubt. And slowly, it erodes the belief that you can rely on yourself. That erosion is quiet, but it's powerful. That's why Stoic discipline isn't about showing off. It's about showing up for yourself when no one else is watching. It's about treating solitude as sacred, not as empty time, but as a proving ground. A space where you mold the version of you that the world will eventually meet. So ask yourself honestly, who am I when the lights are off? When the door is closed? When there's no audience? Because that version of you, the one without a filter, without a script, is the one who is building your future. And the more aligned that version becomes, the more effortless it is to lead, speak, create, and act in public. Because you're not performing, you're simply being. And now that we've examined the quiet roots of character, it's time to explore how your energy responds to pressure and why silence can sometimes speak louder than strength. 8. Tame the dopamine. Rewire the reward. If your mind feels restless, scattered, or constantly pulled toward distraction, it's not because you're weak. It's because your biology has been hijacked. We're living in a world engineered for stimulation, endless scrolls, sudden pings, flashing updates. Every corner of modern life is designed to spike your dopamine and keep you chasing what's fast, easy, and shallow. The danger, it feels normal, so normal that we stop questioning it. But the Stoics would ask you directly, does this habit serve your soul or just your senses? Because not everything that feels good is good for you, and not everything that's uncomfortable should be avoided. The Stoic path to discipline begins with this truth. Not all rewards are equal. Some rewards are loud, instant, and empty. Others are quiet, slow, and deeply fulfilling. Discipline, at its core, is about learning to tell the difference. To retrain your brain to stop chasing the cheap and start building what actually lasts. Dopamine itself isn't the enemy, it's how your brain learns what to return to. But in today's world, your system is flooded. Every like, every notification, every new video gives you a quick hit. Your brain starts associating pleasure with ease, not effort. And then, when it comes time to sit still, to focus, to work, your mind revolts. It tells you this is boring. Give me something new. That resistance you feel, that urge to click away. That's not lack of discipline. That's the conditioning of a distracted world. The Stoics wouldn't tell you to reject pleasure. They would tell you to elevate it. To stop rewarding yourself with noise and start finding reward in substance. Not the rush of checking a feed, but the quiet pride of finishing a task. Not the thrill of being seen, but the fulfillment of keeping your word. Not the escape of consumption, but the strength of creation. This shift takes effort. It means redesigning your environment so the path of least resistance leads toward your values. Keep your phone out of reach during focused work. Replace the morning scroll with 5 minutes of breath and intention. Read instead of browse. Walk instead of swipe. End your day not with one more dopamine spike, but with a reflection in silence. These aren't random habits. They're acts of defiance, small rebellions against a world that profits from your distraction. And if you stay consistent, something begins to change. Your brain rewires, slowly, quietly, but powerfully. You start to crave what builds you. You find joy in finishing, not just starting. Presence begins to feel more satisfying than stimulation. This is how you tame the dopamine, not by denying yourself joy, but by redefining it. You stop settling for crumbs of pleasure and start building a feast of meaning, because true satisfaction doesn't shout, it whispers. It comes from effort, from completion, from presence. So pause and ask, where am I still chasing what drains me? What habits reward my impulses but rob my clarity? And what would happen if I replaced those spikes with structure, with silence, with something that lasts? Because your mind isn't broken, it's trained. And the same way it was trained to crave distraction, it can be trained to crave discipline. Now that your inner chemistry is being reshaped, the next step is to understand how to anchor that change by designing a personal code you don't break, no matter what. 9. Structure is a form of mercy. We often treat structure like a prison. Strict schedules, color-coded calendars, rigid routines, as if the moment you commit to structure, you lose all freedom. But that's only true when structure is forced without understanding. Real structure, intentional, thoughtful structure, isn't a punishment. It's a gift. It's mercy. A way of protecting yourself from chaos, not because you're afraid, but because you care enough to design your life rather than survive it. Without structure, freedom becomes fragmentation. You might be busy all day, but nothing truly moves. You jump from task to task, screen to screen, conversation to conversation, and yet by nightfall, you feel drained and directionless. As Seneca said, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And that waste doesn't come from laziness. It comes from a lack of structure. The Stoics weren't against pleasure. They didn't reject enjoyment or flow. What they rejected was aimlessness. A day without structure is a day that belongs to distraction, and distraction over time becomes a lifestyle of constant noise and zero clarity. When you let the loudest voice win, you lose your own. Picture this. You start your morning with no plan. First thing you do is check your phone. You answer a few messages. You open your inbox. Suddenly, your day is reacting to what shows up. You follow whatever seems urgent. You drift. Hours pass. You're working but not leading. By evening, you're wiped, but somehow unsatisfied. Now contrast that with a structured beginning. You wake up without touching your phone. You sit in silence. You stretch. You journal. You already know your first priority, so you don't waste mental energy deciding what to do. By noon, your core task is done. That's not robotic. That's aligned. That's structure working in service of peace, not pressure. Structure doesn't mean more work. It means less wasted effort. It means filtering out the noise so what matters can rise to the surface. When you build a structure around your values, you don't restrict your life, you give it shape. And that shape becomes a container for your energy, your creativity, your discipline. Even artists, thinkers, and free spirits thrive with structure, not rigid timelines but sacred boundaries. Time carved out for deep work, rituals that signal focus, environments that nurture flow. Creativity doesn't die in structure, it's unleashed by it. Because when your mind isn't constantly managing chaos, it can actually go deep. And it's not just about productivity. Your emotional health depends on rhythm. When your days are chaotic, your nervous system lives in fight or flight. When everything feels urgent, anxiety becomes normal. But with structure, your body relaxes. Your mind clears. You make space not just for doing, but for resting, reflecting, and reconnecting. So ask yourself honestly, where are you still resisting structure? Maybe out of fear it will box you in. But what if structure isn't a cage, but a compass? What if it's the very thing that lets you move freely without getting lost? Because life will pull at you from every direction. And without something steady to return to, you'll be swept away. Structure gives you something to hold. A rhythm that says, this is where I begin, this is where I return. It doesn't silence your spontaneity. It holds it. It gives your efforts a home. So give yourself that mercy. Not more rules, but more rhythm. Because the more structure you create around what matters, the more space you'll feel inside. And in that space, discipline stops feeling like a grind and starts becoming who you are. Now that the shape of your life is becoming intentional, it's time to examine what kind of voice you carry and how self-respect changes the way the world listens to you. 10. Act like the person you are becoming. Every decision you make is more than just a choice. It's a vote, not just for your future, but for your identity. Every time you say yes or no, every time you show up or fall back, you're shaping the kind of person you believe yourself to be. You're not just building habits, you're rehearsing a self. The Stoics weren't concerned with surface-level actions, they were after transformation. Not behavior for behavior's sake, but character that flows naturally from who you become. So ask yourself honestly, who are you becoming? Not in theory, not in some distant future, but today, in the way you get out of bed, in the way you respond when you're annoyed, in how you treat your body, your mind, your word. Are your actions aligned with the person you say you want to be, or are they echoing an older version of yourself you claim to be leaving behind? If you want to become disciplined, focused, calm, powerful, then you must begin acting like that version of yourself now. Not when it's easy, not when the stars align, but right here in the mess and movement of your ordinary life. Because identity-based discipline is different from short-term motivation. It doesn't ask you to fake it. It invites you to practice. Imagine you want to be a writer. The old you waits for inspiration. The writer you're becoming shows up every morning, even if the words are clumsy. You want to be healthy. The old you negotiates with the gym. The disciplined version treats movement like a sacred ritual, not a burden. You want to be emotionally strong. The old you reacts impulsively. The evolving you pauses, breathes, chooses your words. Each moment is a fork in the road. You're either reinforcing who you were or rehearsing who you're becoming. But don't confuse this with pretending. This isn't about putting on a mask. It's about training. You don't fake calm, you practice it. You don't force confidence, you build it through repetition. And slowly, the act becomes natural. The habit becomes part of you. The future you imagined starts to feel familiar. Marcus Aurelius knew this. That's why he didn't just write about wisdom and temperance, he practiced it in the solitude of his journal. He examined his days not to justify them, but to align them. His reflections weren't about who he had been, they were about who he was still becoming, because identity is not fixed, it's sculpted. Chiseled out of your choices, moment by moment, day after day. And yes, this process is uncomfortable, because stepping into a new self means letting go of the old one. It means leaving behind familiar excuses, familiar reactions, familiar narratives. That's why it's so easy to stay the same, because change demands not just effort, but honesty. The kind of honesty that asks, am I willing to give up who I've been for the chance to become who I could be? The path forward is clear. Act like the person who follows through. Act like the one who protects their time, guards their energy, speaks with integrity, not perfectly, but deliberately. Because each act is a signal, a quiet message to your future self that says, this is who we are now. And when your actions begin to align with your ideals, your emotions follow. Your confidence grows, your identity stabilizes. Because discipline is never just about effort, it's about embodiment. And the more you embody the person you're becoming, the less effort it takes to remain that way. Now, everything begins to integrate. The chaos fades, the identity sharpens, and what comes next is not about pushing harder, but about moving forward from a place of deep, grounded clarity. 11. Every minute is a brick in the temple of your life. You are given 1,240 minutes each day. Quiet, unmarked, easy to overlook. But each one is a brick, and whether you realize it or not, you're always building something. The question is never whether you have time. The real question is, what are you constructing with it? The Stoics were obsessed with time not because they feared death, but because they understood how sacred each moment is. Seneca once said, people are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. Everything else in life can be regained. Time cannot. Every minute spent in distraction, in indecision, in avoidance, that's a brick misplaced. And a life built on scattered moments slowly collapses. You might not feel it today, but the structure you're living inside is already forming, and in time, it becomes the world you wake up in. Think of someone you admire, not for their success, but for their steadiness, their depth, their presence. That person wasn't built by one big decision. They were built in silence, minute by minute, in the way they focused, the way they responded to difficulty, the way they showed up when it would have been easier not to. Let's be clear. This isn't about maximizing every second like a machine. This is about clarity, intention. When you spend 30 minutes scrolling, it feels harmless. But do it every day, and you lose over 11 days a year to nothing. Now flip that. Write for 30 minutes a day, and you've written a book in a year. Read for 15, and you've consumed libraries of wisdom. Reflect for 10, and your patterns begin to shift. That's the point. Discipline isn't about doing more. It's about building with what you already have. One brick, one breath, one moment at a time. The Stoics journaled not because it looked productive, but because they knew if they didn't shape their days would shape them. They understood there is no neutral. Every minute is motion, toward something or away. So what does that look like? You wake up. Instead of grabbing your phone, you breathe. You reflect. That's a brick. You work on one thing instead of 10. Another brick. You walk when you'd rather scroll. You pause when you'd rather react. You follow through when quitting would be easier. Brick by brick by brick. Until one day you look around and realize you haven't just survived time. You've built something with it. So ask yourself now, what am I constructing with my minutes today? Does this moment carry weight? Because the temple of your life is not built someday. It's built now. And once you understand that, you're ready for the final truth, that discipline isn't just about doing, but about remembering what truly matters when everything tries to make you forget. 12. If you don't measure it, it's not growth. You say you want to improve, you want to grow, evolve, become stronger. But how do you know if you're actually moving forward? If you're not measuring, you're guessing, and if you're guessing, you're drifting. That's the quiet truth most people avoid, because measurement demands clarity. And clarity forces you to confront what's real, not what you hope, not what you assume, but what is. The Stoics knew this long before modern psychology confirmed it. Without self-examination, there is no transformation. Without reflection, effort becomes motion without direction. Discipline becomes noise. You can't improve what you don't track. You can't refine what you don't observe. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. But habits don't form by accident. They form by design, and design begins with attention. Attention comes from tracking, not to shame yourself, but to illuminate the path. This isn't about turning your life into a spreadsheet. It's about making your growth visible, measurable, tangible. Imagine trying to build a house without ever checking your measurements. You wouldn't. Imagine steering a ship without ever checking your heading. You'd drift. And yet, people try to build a life, one of purpose, focus, discipline, without checking in, without stopping to ask, am I on course? Then they wonder why they feel disconnected, stuck, aimless. It's not because they're lazy, it's because they're blind. They're working hard, but in the wrong direction. Let's get practical. Do you know how often you break your own promises? How much time you spend lost in distraction? How many days you actually follow through? Without measurement, those answers stay blurry, and vagueness is the enemy of progress. But when you start tracking even just a little, things shift. You begin to see your patterns, the excuses you fall back on, the moments you collapse. And that awareness gives you something powerful: choice. The Stoics practiced this daily. Marcus Aurelius would ask himself each night, what did I do well? Where did I fall short? What can I improve tomorrow? That's not performance. That's alignment. That's using your attention like a compass. And over time, those small reflections become your edge. You stop repeating mistakes on autopilot. You begin adjusting with purpose. That's how real growth happens, not through one breakthrough, but through daily calibration. Maybe for you that's journaling, Maybe it's reviewing your goals every Sunday. Maybe it's simply writing down one win and one loss before bed. It doesn't have to be complex. It just has to be consistent. Because when you measure your effort, even when no one sees it, something deep shifts. You begin to respect your path. You stop acting like discipline is something you force and start realizing it's something you build. Brick by brick. Pattern by pattern. Choice by choice. And when you can see your progress clearly, you no longer hope you're changing. You know you are. Now that the foundation has been laid, there's only one thing left to say. This is not the end of the work. It's the beginning of your discipline taking form. Let's bring everything together. So pause and ask yourself, where am I still moving blindly? What would shift if I started measuring with presence instead of perfection? Because discipline without direction fades into noise, but discipline with awareness becomes power. The Stoics showed us that true structure is not a cage, but a path, a way to bring chaos into calm, a way to align your days with who you're meant to become. You don't need to be flawless. You just need to return to what matters again and again. Lay the brick, hold the standard, and when you fall, rise clearer. Each choice is a quiet declaration. I am not drifting, I am becoming. So if this spoke to you, subscribe for more like this and drop a simple comment below. Stay disciplined. Keep walking with intention. Your future is built in what you choose next. The next episode will meet you there.